In the winter of 1889, Dr. Marcus Whitmore made an announcement that shocked the entire medical community of Boston. He was conducting an experiment that would revolutionize the treatment of mental illness, and his primary subject would be his own wife, Eleanor, a 34-year-old woman who had been declared incurably insane by every specialist in New England. The Boston Medical Society was intrigued, but they had no idea what Whitmore was truly doing in the basement of his Beacon Hill mansion, or what would be discovered when police finally broke down those doors 6 months later. 17 patients were dead. The basement was flooded with 3 feet of water, and Eleanor Whitmore was found alive, changed in ways that defied medical explanation, speaking a language no one had ever heard before. What really happened in that basement? What did Dr. Whitmore do to those people? And why did Eleanor survive when everyone else died screaming? Before we uncover the disturbing truth, subscribe, hit that bell, and comment your state below. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Part 1. The perfect Dr. Winter in Boston arrived early in 1888, bringing with it a cold that seemed to seep into bones and settle there. The Charles River froze solid by November. Snow piled. In the narrow streets of Beacon Hill, where Boston's wealthiest families lived behind thick walls and thicker secrets, Dr. Marcus Whitmore was 41 years old and considered one of the most brilliant minds in American psychiatry. He had studied in Vienna under men who were revolutionizing the understanding of the human mind. He had written 3 books that were required reading at Harvard Medical School. He spoke at conferences across Europe. His patients included senators, industrialists, and society women who paid extraordinary sums for his discreet treatment of their nervous conditions. He was tall and striking, with premature silver at his temples that gave him an air of distinguished authority. His voice was measured and calming. His manner was professional but warm. Patients trusted him instantly. That was his greatest skill, inspiring trust in people who desperately needed someone to believe in. He had married Eleanor Ashford in 1878. She came from old Boston money, the kind of wealth that built universities and museums. She was beautiful, educated, passionate about literature and social reform. For 8 years, their marriage was reportedly happy. They hosted salons where writers and thinkers gathered. They traveled to Europe regularly. They were everything a prominent Boston couple should be. Then, in 1886, something changed. Eleanor began experiencing what doctors called episodes. She would lose time finding herself in different rooms with no memory of how she got there. She heard voices that no one else could hear. She claimed to see things that were not there, figures standing in corners, watching her, waiting for something. Marcus consulted with colleagues. They diagnosed hysteria, female nervous disorder, possible early dementia. They prescribed bed rest, cold water treatments, tonics containing morphine and cocaine. Nothing helped. The episodes grew worse. Eleanor became violent during certain phases, attacking servants, smashing furniture, screaming about drowning, about water filling her lungs, about people trapped beneath the surface. By early 1889, she had been committed to 3 different asylums. Each time, Marcus withdrew her after a few weeks, claiming the conditions were inadequate, the treatments too barbaric. His colleagues began to whisper, was Dr. Whitmore too emotionally involved? Was his judgment compromised by love? Should someone else handle Eleanor's case? That was when Marcus made his announcement. He would conduct a revolutionary experiment. He would prove that mental illness was not a spiritual or moral failing, but a physical condition that could be treated through scientific means. He would cure Eleanor himself, using methods he had been developing for years, but never had the opportunity to test properly. The Boston Medical Society was skeptical, but intrigued. Marcus Whitmore had earned enough credibility that they were willing to let him try. What they did not know was that Marcus had been planning this for 18 months, that Eleanor's illness was not what it seemed, that everything about to happen had been carefully orchestrated from the very beginning. Marcus began recruiting patients in February 1889, not from hospitals or asylums, but from the streets, people who would not be missed, people whose disappearances would cause no investigations. He found them everywhere: the Irish immigrant who drank himself unconscious in alleys, the former factory worker with a morphine addiction, the prostitute dying of syphilis, the homeless woman who talked to herself on Boston Common, the teenage boy caught stealing bread, the elderly man with dementia whose family had abandoned him. 17 people in total. He offered them shelter, food, medical care. He told them he was conducting a study on treatments for various conditions. He promised them compensation. Most agreed immediately. What did they have to lose? He brought them to his mansion on Beacon Hill, to rooms prepared in the basement. Not cells, he insisted. Treatment rooms. Each patient had a bed, a small table, basic furnishings. The rooms were connected by a hallway that led to a central chamber where Marcus conducted his examinations and procedures. What the patients did not know was that the basement had been extensively modified. The walls were reinforced concrete 3 feet thick. The doors were steel, locked from outside. The windows had been bricked over months ago, and the entire basement level could be sealed completely, isolated from the rest of the house. Marcus had also installed something else: a series of pipes connected to the mansion's water supply, with valves that could flood the entire basement level in a matter of hours. He told his staff it was a safety measure, a way to extinguish fires. They believed him. Why would they question Dr. Whitmore? Eleanor was placed in the central chamber in a special room Marcus called the observation suite. It was larger than the others, with medical equipment, a surgical table, cabinets full of instruments and chemicals. This was where Marcus spent most of his time, with Eleanor, away from the other patients, conducting experiments no one else was allowed to witness. His staff had instructions. They would deliver food to the patients 3 times daily, sliding trays through slots in the doors. They would never enter the rooms. They would never speak to the patients beyond basic necessities. They would report any unusual behavior to Marcus immediately, and they would never, under any circumstances, enter Eleanor's room. Only Marcus had the key. The experiment began on March 1st, 1889. Marcus told the Boston Medical Society he would provide updates every 2 weeks. He told his staff that breakthrough discoveries took time and privacy. He told the patients they were helping advance medical science. Everyone believed what they needed to believe. But late at night, when the house was quiet, strange sounds came from the basement. Screaming that was muffled by thick walls but still audible if you stood in certain rooms. Sounds of water rushing through pipes. Eleanor's voice, sometimes her own, sometimes speaking in tones that did not sound human at all. The staff began to worry. But Dr. Whitmore paid them extraordinarily well, and he reminded them constantly that revolutionary science often looked like madness to untrained eyes, that the patients were experiencing discomfort but not harm, that everything was carefully controlled, that they were witnessing history being made. Some believed him, others quietly looked for new employment, but no one reported anything to authorities. In 1889, Boston, if a wealthy doctor claimed to be conducting medical research, no one questioned his methods too closely. What Marcus was actually doing in that basement would not be fully understood until much later, until investigators pieced together journals and notes and testimony from people who had heard things they could not explain. Marcus Whitmore believed he had discovered something profound. He believed that consciousness was not localized in the brain, but was instead something that could be transferred, stored, even merged between individuals under the right conditions. He believed that mental illness was caused by fractured consciousness, pieces of awareness scattered across multiple states of existence, and he believed he could cure this by using water as a medium for consciousness transfer. It was insane. It violated every principle of legitimate medical science, but Marcus had convinced himself it was true, and he had built an entire experimental framework around this delusion. The treatment worked like this. Marcus would place a patient in what he called a submersion tank, basically a sealed metal coffin filled with water. The patient would be strapped down, unable to move. A breathing apparatus allowed them to survive underwater, but barely. Just enough oxygen to maintain consciousness without providing comfort. Then Marcus would introduce various chemicals into the water. drugs that altered perception, that caused hallucinations, that broke down the patient's sense of self. He believed these chemicals, combined with the sensory deprivation of submersion, would cause consciousness to separate from the body and disperse into the water itself. While the first patient was submerged, Marcus would place a second patient in an adjacent tank, connected by a series of pipes. He believed consciousness would flow from one person to another through the water, that he could transfer memories, personality traits, even skills between individuals. It was torture disguised as science. The patients experienced hours of being trapped underwater, drugged, hallucinating, unable to move or scream or escape. Many went mad. Some died from the drugs. Others drowned when the breathing apparatus failed or Marcus miscalculated dosages. And Eleanor was at the center of all of it. Marcus believed his wife's illness was caused by her consciousness being fractured into 17 pieces. He believed each piece existed inside another person, scattered across Boston, waiting to be gathered. That was why he had recruited 17 patients. He was going to extract Eleanor's consciousness from each of them, transfer it back into her through the water, and make her whole again. It was the delusion of a brilliant mind that had broken under pressure. Marcus had been one of the greatest psychiatric minds of his generation, but somewhere along the way, he had lost the ability to distinguish between revolutionary insight and complete madness. The patients began dying in April. The first was the elderly man with dementia. He simply did not wake up after a submersion treatment. Marcus told his staff the man had died of natural causes, that his heart had given out. They believed him. The body was removed quietly, buried in a cemetery under a false name. The second death was the Irish immigrant. He went into convulsions during treatment and died before Marcus could stabilize him. The third was the prostitute. She drowned when her breathing apparatus malfunctioned. The fourth, fifth, sixth followed in rapid succession throughout May. Marcus did not stop. Each death convinced him he was getting closer to success. Each failure was just refinement needed in his methodology. He adjusted drug dosages, modified equipment, tried different combinations of patients in the tanks. He worked 18-hour days, barely eating, barely sleeping, obsessed with proving his theory correct. And with each treatment, Eleanor changed. She spoke less. Her eyes became distant. During lucid moments, she told the staff that she could feel other people inside her head, that 17 different voices were speaking at once, that she was drowning in consciousness that was not her own. The staff finally became concerned enough to contact Dr. Whitmore's colleagues in June. They described what they had witnessed: the deaths, the strange treatments, Eleanor's deteriorating condition. The Boston Medical Society decided to conduct a surprise inspection. On June 15, 1889, 5 prominent doctors arrived at the Whitmore mansion without warning. Marcus refused them entry. He claimed the experiment was at a critical phase. That interruption would invalidate months of work. They insisted. He became agitated, claiming they were conspiring against him, jealous of his breakthrough. Finally, they forced their way inside. What they found upstairs was normal, a well-maintained mansion, but the basement door was locked with multiple deadbolts. Marcus claimed he had lost the key. The doctors called for police. It took 2 hours to break through. The basement was flooded, 3 feet of water covering the entire floor. Bodies floated in it, 17 of them in various states of decomposition. The smell was overwhelming. The submersion tanks stood in the central chamber, still connected by pipes, still full of chemical-tainted water. And in Eleanor's room, they found her alive, sitting in a chair elevated above the waterline, staring at nothing. When they spoke to her, she did not respond in English. She spoke in a language no linguistic expert could identify. Her voice shifted between different tones and accents. Sometimes she sounded like herself. Sometimes she sounded like an old man, or a young boy, or a woman with an Irish accent. Marcus stood in the doorway, watching them discover everything. He did not try to run. He did not try to explain. He simply said, It worked. Can you not see? She is complete now. All 17 pieces restored. My wife is whole again. They arrested him immediately. The trial was brief. He was declared insane and committed to McLean Asylum, where he died 6 months later, still insisting. He had succeeded, still claiming he had cured Eleanor. But Eleanor remained a mystery. She survived, physically healthy, but mentally transformed. She never spoke English again, only that strange language that seemed to be 17 different voices speaking in unison. She would answer to any of the patients' names. She displayed skills she had never learned: carpentry, accounting, fluency in Gaelic. She had memories that were not her own, describing childhoods in Ireland, in factories, on the streets. The medical community could not explain it. Some claimed mass hysteria. Others suggested elaborate hoax. A few wondered if Marcus had somehow been correct, if he had actually accomplished something impossible, something that defied every law of science and nature. Eleanor was institutionalized for the rest of her life. She died in 1923 at age 68, still speaking that amalgamated language, still displaying fragmented personalities, still claiming to be 17 people trapped in one body. The official story was that Dr. Marcus Whitmore suffered a psychotic break and murdered 17 vulnerable people while torturing his wife with experimental treatments. This was the version taught in medical schools as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unethical research. But there were inconsistencies, details that investigators found but could not explain publicly. Marcus's journals described the experiment in meticulous detail, but they also contained passages that seemed to predict things that had not yet happened. He wrote about Eleanor speaking in multiple voices weeks before the treatment began. He described the exact order in which patients would die, with dates that matched actual deaths perfectly. He included sketches of Eleanor's transformed state drawn months before the discovery. It was as if Marcus had not been conducting an experiment at all, but following a script. As if something had told him exactly what to do, step by step, guarantee a specific outcome. Several investigators noticed something else. The 17 patients Marcus selected all had one thing in common. They had all nearly drowned at some point in their lives. The Irish immigrant had fallen into Boston Harbor as a child. The factory worker had been pulled from a canal. The prostitute had attempted suicide by drowning. Every single patient had survived drowning, had been pulled back from death in water. Marcus's journals never mentioned this. He never explained how he selected patients with this specific shared experience. When asked during his trial, he claimed it was coincidence. But 17 people, all with near-drowning experiences, gathered in one place for an experiment involving water submersion. The odds were astronomical, and then there was the language Eleanor spoke. Linguistic experts analyzed recordings made during her institutionalization. They found fragments of 17 different languages and dialects, blended together in ways that should have been linguistically impossible. But underlying all of it was something else. Something that did not match any known human language. Sounds that seemed aquatic, gurgling and flowing, like water trying to form words. One investigator, a young doctor named Thomas Brennan, became obsessed with the case. He spent years researching, interviewing everyone connected to the Whitmore mansion. He discovered something that was removed from the official record. 3 months before Eleanor's illness began, the Whitmores had taken a trip to a coastal town in Maine. They had stayed in a hotel built on a cliff overlooking the ocean. On their 3rd night, both Marcus and Eleanor went for a walk along the beach. They did not return until morning. When they did, both were soaking wet, their clothes torn, covered in seaweed. They claimed they had been caught by a rogue wave and nearly drowned, but managed to save each other. The hotel staff reported something strange. The night of the Whitmore's incident, 17 guests staying at the hotel all reported identical nightmares. They dreamed they were drowning, that something in the water was pulling them down, that voices were calling them to let go and sink. Several guests checked out early, disturbed by the vividness of these dreams. Brennan believed something happened that night on the beach, something neither Marcus nor Eleanor fully remembered or understood. He believed they encountered something in the water, something that had been waiting, something that needed them for its own purposes. He believed Marcus did not design the experiment. Something else did, using Marcus as an instrument. The 17 patients were not random victims. They were specifically chosen, marked by their near-drowning experiences, carrying pieces of something that needed to be assembled. And Eleanor was not a victim at all. She was a vessel, a place where 17 fractured pieces of consciousness could be gathered and merged. But consciousness of what? Not human. Something older. Something that existed in water, that moved through water, that used water to spread and survive. Something that had found a way to exist in human form by splitting itself across 17 people who had touched its domain and survived. Brennan wrote a report detailing his theory. He submitted it to the Boston Medical Society in 1897. They rejected it as unscientific fantasy. His reputation was destroyed. He spent his final years trying to prove his claims, but no one would listen. He died in 1903. His work dismissed as the obsession of a man who had studied the Whitmore case too long and been driven mad by it. His papers were donated to Harvard Medical School's archives after his death, where they sat forgotten for decades. The Whitmore mansion was demolished in 1892. The basement was filled with concrete before demolition, sealed permanently. No one wanted to risk what might still be down there, what might still be waiting in pipes and chambers that had once held so much water and so much death. But strange things happened on that site for years afterward. The construction company that demolished the mansion reported that 17 workers quit over the course of the project, all claiming they heard voices when they worked near where the basement had been, all describing the same sensation of drowning, of water in their lungs, even though they were on dry ground. In 1908, a building was constructed on the site, a boarding house. It flooded 3 times in the first year, despite being on elevated ground with no apparent water source. The flooding always happened at night. Residents reported waking to find their rooms filled with 3 feet of water, though no pipes had burst, no windows broken. The water would drain away by morning, leaving no trace except the damage. The building was abandoned in 1910. It stood empty for 20 years, until it was finally torn down and replaced with a parking structure. Even now, people report strange experiences there. The feeling of being underwater, voices speaking in a language that sounds like water moving. The sensation of 17 different presences, all trapped, all waiting. Eleanor spent 34 years in institutional care. Her doctors kept detailed records of her condition. She never regained the ability to speak English. She never displayed any single consistent personality. But she was not violent. She was not dangerous. She simply existed as something that should not have been possible. 17 people merged into one body, speaking with voices that did not belong to any of them individually. She drew constantly during her institutionalization. Thousands of sketches, all depicting water, oceans, rivers, lakes, rain. And in every drawing, hidden in the waves and currents, were faces. 17 faces, sometimes human, sometimes something else. Always watching. Always waiting. The night she died, every patient in her ward reported the same dream. They were underwater, drowning, and Eleanor was speaking to them in that strange language. She was telling them it was time. She was calling them to let go, to sink, to join something vast and patient that had been waiting for so long. 17 patients died that night alongside Eleanor. 17 people with no prior health complications, no warning signs. They all drowned somehow, despite being on dry ground, far from any water source. Autopsies found their lungs full of salt water. Ocean water, though they were hundreds of miles from the sea. The official explanation was mass contamination. Someone had somehow introduced contaminated water into the ward's drinking supply. Unlikely but possible. The institution was shut down, the staff investigated, new protocols implemented. But Thomas Brennan's nephew, a doctor who had inherited his uncle's papers, knew better. He read the old research, saw the patterns. He understood what his uncle had tried to prove decades ago. That something had used Marcus Whitmore to reassemble itself. That Eleanor had been its vessel for 34 years. And that when she died, it had finally found a way to spread. He tried to warn people. He tried to publish his findings. He was dismissed just as his uncle had been. The medical community could not accept what he was claiming. It was too impossible, too monstrous, too far beyond what science could explain. He destroyed his uncle's papers eventually, burned them all, hoping that would end it. But the information was already out there, scattered through archives and forgotten files, waiting to be rediscovered. So what really happened in that basement? Was Marcus Whitmore a madman who tortured 17 people and his own wife? Was he a brilliant scientist whose experiments succeeded in ways no one wanted to acknowledge? Or was he a puppet, used by something that needed a human mind to accomplish its goals? The evidence supports all these interpretations. The truth depends on what you are willing to believe about the boundaries of science, the nature of consciousness, and whether there are things in the water that are older and stranger than we want to admit. What is certain is this: 17 people died. Eleanor Whitmore changed into something that medical science could not explain. And even now, over a century later, people who visit that site report strange experiences. Water where there should be none. Voices that sound like drowning. The feeling of being watched by 17 different presences, all merged together, all waiting for something. Thomas Brennan spent his final years researching drowning cases. He found patterns. Every year there are drowning victims who survive, who are pulled back from death. And a significant percentage of these survivors report the same experience. While unconscious, they heard voices in the water. 17 distinct voices speaking in unison, calling them to let go, to sink, to join something vast and patient. Most doctors dismiss these reports as hallucinations caused by oxygen deprivation. But Brennan believed they were real. He believed that whatever Marcus Whitmore assembled in that basement did not die with Eleanor. It just changed form, spread out again, waiting in water everywhere for the right conditions, the right people, the right moment to reassemble. He believed it would happen again someday. Another doctor, another experiment, another 17 people gathered in water. And when it did, whatever consciousness was merged in Eleanor would finally complete its purpose. What that purpose is, no one knows. But Brennan's final journal entry, written the night before he died, contained one terrifying sentence. They are not trying to become human. They are trying to make humans become them, and they have all the time in the world to succeed. What do you think really happened in the Whitmore mansion? Was Marcus Whitmore insane, or did he discover something science still cannot explain? Do you believe something is waiting in the water? Something that used those 17 people for its own purposes? Leave your comment below. If you enjoyed this story and want more dark historical mysteries like this, subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story, and share this video with someone who loves mysteries that blur the line between history and horror. These stories exist in the shadows between documented fact and unexplainable truth. These voices whisper from archives and forgotten files, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. See you in the next video.